Committee members, the clerk has advised me that we have a quorum. Everybody's been sound tested. I will warn there is some issues with practically everybody appearing this morning, so we virtually. So we'll go as we go. It's in and out. So I called a meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 73 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development and Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order of June 23rd, 2022, which means some people are participating by Zoom remotely, and we have the rest here in the room. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would ask that all questions be directed through me, the chair, and wait until I recognize you until you speak. You have the option of speaking in the official language of your choice. If you're in the room, use the headset. And if you're appearing remotely, use the translation icon at the bottom of your surface. If there is an issue with translation, please get my attention. We'll suspend while it's being corrected. I would also like to advise those that taking picture still shots of the meeting virtually or in the room is not allowed. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, October the 17th, 2022, the committee will resume its study on financialization of housing. We'll begin with today appearing as witnesses in the first hour as an individual is Steve Pomeroy, industry professor, Canadian Housing Evidence Collaborative, appearing virtually. From the Federation of Rental Housing Providers of Ontario, Tony Irwin, who is in the room with us, President and Chief Executive Officer. And from the Minto Group, Dan Dixon, Senior Vice President and Project Finance. We will begin with each presenter has 5 minutes to give an opening presentation, and then we'll go to questions from committee members. We will begin with Mr. Pomeroy for 5 minutes, please. Mr. Pomeroy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting me to this important discussion. In my work as an academic and researcher in this area, a number of my studies have been cited by other witnesses, particularly around the very dramatic erosion of the low-end rental stock, a loss of over 550,000 units in the decade 2011 to 21, at a time when we only built about 70,000 units of new affordable housing. So the loss of existing stock is a critical issue, and that's being lost as a result of the rents moving above affordable levels. I've submitted a brief to the committee. I don't know if it's been translated and circulated, but I'll simply highlight some of the key points in that brief, which discusses the issue of financialization, as well as the state of the rental market and the issues that really are creating the affordability crisis in rental housing. The analysis revealed that the issues contributing to the ongoing phenomenon of rent gouging and rent evictions and the dramatic ongoing erosion of these lower rent options are pervasive and relate to a wide range of investors, of which REITs are a very small fraction. In fact, as other witnesses have indicated, REITs are only manage and operate less than 5% of all rental housing in the country. The behaviors have more to do with the transformation of rental housing into an attractive asset class, which is attracting investment both from large institutional investors as well as many small investors. And this is really the increasing issues are related to an insufficient supply of rental housing, which is a long-term phenomenon in this country. And this is being exacerbated by very significant increases in demand, especially from international students and temporary foreign workers, which are over and above the immigration targets, as well as the pent-up demand from young families seeking to purchase a home who, because of prices and macroprudential policies, can't afford to buy, and as a consequence remain in the rental market. And we've seen a significant reduction in the home ownership rate in this country as a result of them being unable to move out and create vacancies and create a healthier rental market. The other key issue is the provincial regulations of the rental market allowing vacancy decontrol, which is really the feature that is allowing these significant increases in rents. And I think that's an issue, obviously, of provincial jurisdiction, but one that the committee needs to think about. In terms of the recommendations in the paper, the first one relates to vacancy decontrol and its impact. And the recommendation is that request the provinces revise current rent regulations to at least temporarily remove vacancy decontrol mechanism to moderate the excessive increases in rents while new construction catches up to these historically high levels of immigration that are creating these pressures. While this is provincial jurisdiction, there is a precedent for this in 1975. Under the anti-inflationary measures, the federal government asked the provinces to adopt rent regulation, and they all did. Subsequently, those regulations were softened and relaxed once the issue had passed, so it has been done before. The second recommendation that most acquisitions of existing properties by various types of investors utilize CMHC mortgage insurance. The committee suggests that CMHC establish more stringent conditions to limit rent increases for investors utilizing mortgage insurance to purchase existing low rent properties. The third recommendation relates to the changing pattern of institutional investors and REITs in the residential rental market. Historically, these investors purchased existing assets because they were priced better and had less risk than building new. Recently, many of these investors are moving to new construction. So rather than eliminating REITs and institutional investors, we should try to direct their investment into the new supply part of the market. So encouraging a pivot that's already ongoing towards that nature of investment. Fourth recommendation is to encourage institutional investors and pension funds who often invest via REITs and other asset management firms to update and review their ESG investment guidelines to minimize enabling the practice of renoviction and large rent increases of properties in their portfolios. And Michael Brooks has spoken about a industry code of conduct to address this issue in previous hearings. Fifth recommendation is that the government amend the National Housing Strategy to create a funding and financing mechanism that would allow non-profit organizations to purchase existing lower rent units. And by taking them out of the market system, they would decommodify those assets and be able to preserve the lower rents in perpetuity. This also takes advantage of a desire amongst the REITs to dispose of some existing lower rent assets, which I think Dan Dixon will speak about later. And that creates a mutual opportunity both to preserve and to take the proceeds from those sales to invest in new construction. Sixth recommendation is to encourage Immigration and Refugee Citizenship Canada to review and recalibrate the issuance of international student visas and temporary foreign worker permits to better align with new rental supply, and to direct CMHC to utilize its low financing rental construction financing initiative to encourage and support the construction of purpose-built student housing that would take some of the pressure off the market and the displacement that occurs due to the high number of international students entering the country. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pomeroy. Now, Mr. Irwin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. My name is Tony Irwin. I'm President and CEO of the Federation of Rental Housing Providers of Ontario, or FRPO. FRPO has been a leading voice of the rental housing industry for over 30 years. We represent more than 2,200 members who own and or manage over 350,000 rental homes across the province of Ontario. FRPO is also a founding member of the Canadian Federation of Apartment Associations, or CFAA. Today, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to address the HUMA Committee as you review financialization of purpose-built rental housing in Canada. On Tuesday, you heard from my colleague, John Dickey, President of CFAA. John briefed the committee on the various segments of the rental market and how $1 of rent is split between operating and capital expenses and what is left over as net income. Today, I'm going to brief the committee on the cost of major repairs and building modernization of rental apartments. Our apartment stock is aging in this country. In Ontario, over 80% of the existing purpose-built rental stock was built before 1980, making it at least 43 years old. These buildings require significant modernization. Even with regular maintenance, building elements eventually reach the end of their useful life and must be replaced. This includes everything from roofs, balconies, heating systems, elevators, windows, underground parking structures, and other building elements. Replacing any one of these could easily cost 20% of the total annual building revenue, and this is before all other expenses. Figure 3 on page 4 of the joint CFAA-FRPO submission shows real-life examples from 4 different buildings in Ontario in 2022. A new roof cost $442,000, or 18% of the gross rent for the year in one large apartment building. In other buildings, elevator refurbishment, garage concrete restoration, and new windows cost 17%, 48%, and 81% of the gross rent, respectively. These are significant costs for work that is needed to keep buildings safe and structurally sound or to improve energy efficiency by replacing old windows. So how do we pay for essential building modernization? In Ontario, our rent control system consists of several major pillars, including a maximum guideline rent increase tied to CPI. This has a hard cap of 2.5%, a level that is significantly below current inflation, and an ability to apply for an above-guideline increase, or an AGI, to cover a portion of the cost of major repairs. It is important to understand that the AGI process is highly regulated. AGIs are capped in legislation to a maximum 3% rent increase per year over a 3-year period. An AGI application can only be made after the work is complete, and the application must meet all criteria set out in provincial legislation in order to be approved by the Landlord and Tenant Board. In most cases, rental housing providers are only able to recover a portion of the cost of these repairs through AGIs due to the cap. Some have argued that AGI should be removed. However, with the annual rent increase guideline capped at 2.5% and operating costs increasing at a much higher rate, there is no other mechanism to fund large-scale building infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, 80% of Ontario's purpose-built rental stock was built before 1980. If we are not able to make essential repairs and replace building elements and share that cost with residents, the stock will slowly go out of commission. This is in the context of a significant supply shortage of purpose-built rental housing right across this country. In Ontario alone, FRPO Commission reports conclude that we need over 300,000 net new rental units over the next decade to address the supply gap. And AGIs are an essential component that makes Ontario's rent control policy framework viable to operate rental buildings. The current housing affordability challenge in housing, both rental and ownership, is fundamentally a supply problem. We are not building enough housing, including purpose-built rental housing, to keep up with demand. The right policy approach to tackle this challenge should focus on incentives to drive more public and private investment in construction of new rental projects across the country. Policies that further restrict capital investment in a sector grappling with a significant supply shortage will only make matters worse. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. Mr. Dixon, for 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour et merci à vous, Monsieur le Président, et aux membres de ce comité pour l'invitation.
Members of the committee for the invitation to appear before the committee.
And I'm the Senior Vice President of Project Finance for the Minto Group and Minto Apartment REIT. I'm here today to represent Canada's 5 largest publicly traded real estate investment trusts that focus on apartment rentals in Canada on policy matters relating to housing affordability. For convenience, I will refer to these REITs as the REIT Group. The REIT Group members have a multi-decade history as housing providers. We play an important role in housing Canadians, and we are proud of what we do. We provide homes to approximately 120,000 families and households across Canada. Our average rent is $1,394 per month. While we offer apartments at a range of prices to satisfy the housing needs of all Canadian renters, 53% of our homes are affordable at rental rates that are less than 30% of renters' median income, the standard set by CMHC for affordability. Although we run large, visible organizations, we make up a small part of the rental stock in Canada. With approximately 5 million renter households in Canada, the REIT Group's 120,000 suites represent fewer than 2.5% of all rental suites in Canada. The REIT Group believes in the progressive realization of the right to adequate housing as set out in the National Housing Strategy Act. We have proactively met with the Federal Housing Advocate to ensure and improve our understanding of the rights, duties, and obligations of all participants in the housing sector. In this regard, the UN framework referenced in the National Housing Strategy Act is helpful and clear. Governments are accountable to their citizens for the realization of the right to adequate housing. Governments are also responsible for putting frameworks in place to ensure a functioning housing market and that businesses and the private sector are important players. In Canada, the private sector delivers over 96% of all housing. As businesses, our strategy is to meet the needs of our residents while taking care of our employees and the environment. REITs are required to pay out 100% of their taxable income to their unit holders as distributions, where that income is taxed in their hands. The distribution of that income currently provides our unit holders with a yield on their investment of approximately 3%. As we go about operating our businesses, we recognize our apartments are homes that provide comfort, safety, convenience, pride, and a sense of community. We regularly survey our residents and take their feedback seriously. We compete with each other and with the other 4.9 million rental apartments in Canada for tenants to choose our buildings. We support CMHC's call to build 5.8 million new homes by 2030 to restore affordability. The private sector will provide the vast majority of these homes. The total REIT sector in Canada, including apartment REITs and diversified REITs, has over 230,000 homes in its development pipeline. That is the equivalent of 1 full year of housing starts in Canada at a time when we desperately need housing supply. To develop these homes, we need access to the capital markets. That requires a stable and predictable regulatory environment. We agree with many of you on this committee that the government should focus its supports on those 1 in 10 Canadians in core housing need through a mix of social, supportive, cooperative, and subsidized housing. There are tools the government could use to encourage more of that. But the most affordable housing is the existing housing. That's why we support a national acquisition fund to acquire existing affordable rentals and keep them affordable in perpetuity. There are a number of buildings in our portfolios that would be good candidates for this fund. Among the housing rights itemized by the UN is the right to choose one's residence, to determine where to live, and to the freedom of movement. Fulfilling that right requires a robust and functioning private housing market. Public real estate investment trusts are a vital tool in the toolbox for providing choice and value in housing for Canadians. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Before we begin, I forgot to recognize we have Ms. Kusi joining the committee this morning. She's been here before. Welcome. And we have as a guest again, MP Morris. So with that, the only other point, it is the translations, it's the interpreters that decide on the sound quality and if it is inadequate or acceptable. So with that, we'll begin the first round of questioning with Mr. Aitchison for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses. I'd like to start with Mr. Irwin, and I want to talk to you, if you can expand a little bit on the situation where our existing rental stock is aging. It needs to be updated, and we also need more of it. And so we've talked a lot about, what causes delays, municipal approvals, all these issues. Can you give me some specific examples of what the federal government can be doing to help speed up the process of getting new purpose-built rentals constructed?
I mean, we talk about how it really does need to be an all-hands-on-deck approach. Every level of government needs to be committed to getting more housing built, more rental housing built. And I guess in the context of these hearings and this meeting happening today, you want solutions and we want to provide them. But certainly, as I said in my remarks, policies that would disincentivize, that would in fact make it tougher to get housing built, seems like completely the wrong approach to be taking. Right? We need every level of government to say, certainly as relating to purposeful rental housing, it is a priority. We haven't had enough of it built for several decades. What can we do to improve upon that? So whether that is through a Housing Accelerator Fund, whether that's through CMHC providing better rates for loans to be able to get projects into the ground, the federal government does have the capacity to do things through those mechanisms that will help make the economics work. I mean, we have members, and certainly Mr. Dixon can speak to that, who want to build housing. That's what they do. They want to do it. But the economics have to make sense for that to take place. And so, you mentioned, and of course, the municipal approvals, and the provincial government in Ontario is doing a lot to try to make that better. The federal government's role, to me, is in providing support through things like CMHC, not doing things that would only, through taxation, that would only disincentivize and drive investment to other jurisdictions or other countries. That's not going to get housing built. Let's focus on saying we need to say yes, not no. How do we actually make this happen through every level of government using the tools that they have at their disposal to make it happen?
Thanks for that. Mr. Dixon, I'd like to move over to you now. I believe you said in your submission that 52%, almost 53% of your suites, about 120,000 of them, are rented at affordable rates. And so we often talk about new buildings being built with a mix of market and affordable rates, so that the numbers work out and the math adds up on the total project. Can you? That's a staggering number to me that so many of them are at that rate. How are you able to do that? And is there a general formula, or is it project by project?
So, thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Chair. CMHC, when they introduced their MLI Select mortgage insurance product in March of last year, introduced a median renter income index, which is used for them to measure affordability. When we applied that criteria across all of the units in the REIT's portfolio, roughly about half met that criteria. We cater to all needs, so we have higher price units and we have lower price units. On the development side of things, it is virtually impossible to develop in urban environments and provide affordable units without some type of government assistance. The firm that I work for, Minto, is under construction of an affordable building in Etobicoke in Toronto with the help of 2 levels of government. So our Richgrove project at 610 Martin Grove is being built in partnership with the City of Toronto's Open Door program, where they provide capital grants and waiver of property taxes on an ongoing basis. And it is being financed through CMHC's Rental Construction Financing Initiative. And we are able to provide 100 deeply affordable units that meet the City of Toronto's criteria, and the balance of the building meets CMHC's RCFI criteria. I look at this as an example of the private sector working with 2 levels of government to produce something that works for everyone and delivers socially desirable outcomes. We would do more of these projects if the funding was available.
Just quickly, the CMHC has just announced a significant fee increase or premium increase for multi-unit residential, 5+. I assume that is going to have a significant impact on these projects as well?
It will have an impact on projects going forward, and they've also tightened their underwriting criteria for income.
Okay, thank you. Quickly to Mr. Pomeroy, thank you for your submission as well. But from what I heard from you today, I got the distinct impression that you believe that this situation in Canada requires sort of an all-hands-on-deck approach as well, and the private sector and not-for-profit sectors all need to be in the mix on this. Could you confirm or deny that, I guess, and maybe expand on it briefly? You only have about 30 seconds. I apologize.
Yes, absolutely. It is a partnership, and I think discussions between the affordable housing sector and industry have been very constructive and positive. Clearly, to meet construction targets, we need the private sector to build those units. The challenge with just focusing on supply is that it doesn't meet the affordability crisis, so we need to actually do both. Add supply and figure out ways to make that new supply more affordable, which is where you layer in various government subsidy mechanisms that Dan Dix has spoken about.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Aitchison. Yeah, you were 3 seconds under. I am impressed. Mr. Coteau for 5 minutes and 56 seconds, like Mr. Aitchison.
Well, thank you very much,
Coteau.
Mr. Chair. And I hope my sound quality is good for the interpreters. And again, thank you to them for the work they do. And thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I live in a community. It's an interesting community, the Don Mills corridor. You know, we have from about Overlea to Fairview Mall along the corridor. There's about 100 buildings going up. You know, in the next 10 years. And because of that, we've seen a lot of change. Old buildings, for example, the building that I grew up in, 7 and 11 Rochfort, there are 2 buildings next to each other across from the Science Center. They're being torn down, and high-rise buildings are being put up. So we've got 100 towers going up. We've also noticed the larger REITs coming in over the last decade, and I know that I believe Mr. Dixon said they're about 5% of the supply across the country. But we've noticed that, an ongoing pattern. This is not something that's isolated, but I think it was Compton, I think, was the rate where the constant applications for above guidelines rent increases because there's changes in the building, elevator maintenance, things that tenants didn't want, but those percentages really go up. New parking spaces being placed in different buildings where if I have to go visit my aunt, for example, because she needs groceries, I have to pay now to go and see her. Or PSW comes in, they have to pay for parking. And other things, the separation of hydro, the downloading of the insurance to these companies. So I guess my question is to Mr. Dixon, as the representative of the larger REITs in Canada. Obviously, as publicly traded companies and large corporations, the bottom line is the bottom line. You've got to look for ways to increase revenue. Do the REITs participate in practices that may not actually impact rent directly, but more those other services to help boost up profits? Some of those pieces I've mentioned.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'll start by saying that the vast majority of Canadians are protected by formal rent control regimes in 5 provinces and administrative rental caps in other provinces. And the majority this year in 2023 will be receiving increases of between 2.5% and 3%. With respect to, you've asked about AGIs and other sources of revenue. AGIs apply, as Mr. Irwin spoke about in his opening remark, only to major building systems, generally speaking, only to major building systems and long-lived systems. The majority of AGIs get amortized over a 15 to 25-year period, and the application of them is capped at 3% in any given in the first 3 years of application, and then they stop. At the end of the amortization period, the AGI goes away.
So I have a quick question in regards to affordability. The Martin Grove project you talk about, and you said, it would be affordable rent. What does that, do you know the number, what an actual 2-bedroom apartment would cost? Because, for example, in my community, Flemington Park and Thorncliffe, which is next door, I just found out that a 3-bedroom apartment now is above $3,300. What would be considered, and that's considered a community where, where rent is supposed to be affordable. What would the new rent look like in an affordable new building like this Martin Grove project? Out of curiosity, what is the affordability number?
So for the 100 units covered by the city's open door program, rent is capped at 25% of local area income as defined in that agreement. To put that into numbers for you, a 1-bedroom is approximately $1,300 per month. A 2-bedroom is approximately $1,500 per month. There are an additional 125 units that are covered under the RCFI program, which caps rent at 30% of local area income, and the overall rent roll on those units has to be no more than 90% of the average market rate for the area.
So is that I'm assuming the $1,300 is at a loss, to the company. Is there subsidies that come directly from the city to make up for that loss, or do you actually make a profit within that range?
So the city has provided a subsidy of $45,000 per unit for each of the 100 units covered by the program. They have waived development charges on those units and property taxes for the 25-year affordability period.
It's a 25-year period. Wow.
Putting those things together, the cost of construction is still close to $500,000 per unit for us. But with the benefits of the RCFI financing and with the benefits of the property tax abatement, we can make this project pencil. And as I said in response to Member Aitchison, we would do this project over and over again if there were funds available to do it.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Dixon. I appreciate your answers. To Mr. Pomeroy, you talked about a 1970s initiative by the federal government to push forward regulations that impacted the province. I don't know if I heard that right. Can you talk a little bit about that for us, please?
You'll have to hold that, Mr. Pomeroy. You can submit it in writing or use.
Thank you so much.
Use your opportunity at another question we have gone over. Madame Chabot pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. The importance of this report that the committee is working on, I think at our last meeting as well, that we have to take a look at all the research projects that have been done on the financing of these housing things presented by the Minister. We have to seriously examine the financialization of this, including those by the various association groups and REITs, those that currently exist on rental accommodation in particular. We're taking to look at the impact of financing and that they fit in with the National Housing Strategy and the implementation of affordable housing, not $2,000, $3,000 a month for a 2.5 room, but the sustainability of affordability of housing. So my question is addressed to Mr. Pomeroy. I think the report was very clear in the Auditor General's report 2021 that the national strategy must focus to avoid, ensure, in fact, that the financing and support of this for supportable housing and not just housing per se. Would you agree with that, sir, that we should have to target narrowly from the advocate for housing?
Thank you for the question. I'll always respond in English if that's okay. Yes, I think there is a need. I mean, as the industry representatives have indicated, they're very good at building supply. They can't create housing at affordable levels simply because it doesn't make a business case and it doesn't make sense. And therefore, it very much is the role of government to bring in mechanisms, whether it's cheap financing, capital subsidies, or ongoing housing allowances, to improve the affordability for low-income households that otherwise won't be met by the market. So, and I think the National Housing Strategy is certainly the instrument that could and should do that. I think currently, even though it is now identified as an $85 billion initiative, most of that funding is actually loans, not actual contributions and grants. And if we really do want to meet the needs of very low-income people, the National Housing Strategy will need to be significantly enhanced with higher levels of capital contribution and ongoing subsidies. And that's not just a federal role. Certainly the housing allowances are part of the bilateral parts of the National Housing Strategy and could be delivered in collaboration with the provinces who cost share those ongoing housing allowances. But that's critical if we're going to meet low-income housing need.
Vous avez fait une large étude en 2019 où vous indiquez que la perte de logements abordables était expliquée par 2 facteurs, la destruction de vieilles unités.
Point of order,
Ça y a pas de...
Mr. Chair.
You had a nice report in 2019 stating that 1, 2, 3. Hello. Madame Chabot, if you'd like to continue or resume or start over. Well, thanks again for the interpretation. In the 2019 report, to the same witness, you indicated that the loss of affordable housing was based on two basic factors. The first, the destruction of the current stock replaced by new housing units, but particularly the purchase or repurchase by these real estate consortia who would renew them and then optimize or maximize their profit. The impact on those that were purchased by speculators, is that putting a hindrance to affordable housing?
I looked at the number of units renting at affordable levels when I used the benchmark of $750, which is equivalent to affordability for an income of less than $30,000 a year, and found the loss that I mentioned in the opening remarks of 550,000. And the cause of that are indeed twofold. And this member Couteau already mentioned, knocking down existing older structures takes them out of the stock. So we do lose some of that low rent stock as a result of intensification policies, which most municipalities are pursuing. And the other factor was indeed the increased rents that occur as a result of the terms financialization tends to be used as sort of a sort of short form code for these increases in rents. But I think the important point here is that purchasing assets with the intent of increasing yield by raising rents is not the exclusive preserve of real estate investment trusts. There are a wide range of investors, and we hear many media stories of individual investors purchasing a single family house or a duplex, where they're doing the same thing. Small investors buying small apartment buildings are doing the same thing. And it's the fact that they can, that the rent regulations allows them to do this to increase their potential yield, that actually encourages and enables that kind of behavior. But I think that behavior is endemic across many classes of investors. Some do it in illegal ways because the laws allow them to increase the rents, and some tend to bend the rules a little bit, particularly the small investors, where the 57% of no-fault evictions last year through national statistics source identifies the fact that it was the small investors were the ones that were actually causing more evictions than the large institutional and corporate landlords. So I think we have to make sure that we spread our study wide enough to capture all of the actors in this system.
Peut-être une courte question.
A very, very short question, Chair. The National Housing Strategy has several different programs using public funds, and I'm not talking about municipal or provincial contributions or participation. It's their jurisdiction. But in a national federal housing strategy, we have to ensure that the stock of affordable housing is available. Should the programs not all be focused on supporting off-market, let's say, housing to support both private or public?
It's still to me?
Yes, but we're time.
Well, if the chairman will allow, and if I have the time.
Entered in for Madame Chabot. Mr. Pomeroy.
Yes, I mean, I think, on the one hand, it makes sense to direct limited fiscal resources to those most in need. But the problem here is we have a systemic problem in the housing system. If young households can't afford to buy a home and they clog up the rental market and add demand, and we're seeing increase in rents, the National Housing Strategy needs to be comprehensive in its scope. And it needs to consider how it can make a healthier housing system, because if we don't have access to ownership, we have a knock-on effect in the rental market. If rents go up, low-income people are impacted at the bottom. So I think in parallel with subsidies and contributions to very low-income people, we also need to make sure that the system encourages and enables the industry and the housing system as a whole to be as healthy as possible, which I don't think is currently the case.
Merci, Madame Chabot. Ms. Kwan for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. My question is to Mr. Pomeroy. You mentioned that in 1975, the federal government actually instituted a national rent control initiative in collaboration with the provinces. Could you expand on what happened there?
If you recall, in the 1970s, we had extremely high inflation. We think it's bad now. It was 3 times worse back then. Inflation of 13, 14% and mortgage rates of 20, 21% in the later 1970s. As part of a program of an anti-inflationary program that the federal government put in place for wage and price controls, where it was trying to address issues of inflation in the same way that currently the Bank of Canada is through interest rate increases. There were a wide range of initiatives that took place, one of which was to ask the provinces, because we don't have federal jurisdiction in this area, if they would support the federal government in its efforts to control inflation by enacting rent control. So it was entirely voluntary on the part of the provinces, but every province in this country put in place rent controls. As a result of that request, they started unwinding them in the early 1980s. To the point where provinces like Alberta no longer have rent control, but they were in place for 4 or 5 years and did help to suppress inflation at that point in time.
Thank you very much. Do you have any data with respect to, I guess, the rents and in terms of the changes, in terms of the pattern of rent increases during that period?
At that time, rent increases, again, in the 1970s, we had a significant number of federal programs that supported rental construction, the assisted rental program, the multiple unit residential building tax mechanism, as well as significant funding for social housing. So we had quite high levels of production of rental housing, in fact, peak years of rental production. So we were creating sufficient supply that we maintained relatively healthy vacancy rates, and that stopped significant increases in rents at that period in time. It was only really after the mid-1990s, and there is a chart in my paper that tracks rental construction starting in 1990, that we saw a significant reduction in rental supply because all of those federal programs ended and the federal government ceased its funding of social housing effective December 31st, 1993. So we moved from a period of high supply and healthy vacancy rates to a period of low supply, tight vacancy rates, upward pressure on rents. The only offsetting feature, as I talk about in the paper or the brief, is that during that period, we had fairly good access to home ownership. Interest rates were coming down, incomes were rising, employment was rising. And between 1996 and 2006, 800,000 renters became owners. So that had the same effect of building 80,000 rental units a year. So even though we weren't building much, we didn't see the effect of that lack of building. It was really a delayed effect, which is now catching up with us. And it's really that sort of historical period that really it matters as we think about things today.
So what I'm hearing from you is that we need both from the federal government. So that is, we need the government to actually build social housing or co-op housing. In addition to that, we also need rent control measures in order to actually dampen the situation that we're faced with right now with the housing crisis. Am I correct to understand that? Maybe just a quick yes or no?
Yeah, well, yeah, yes, but in the sense that I've generally been a proponent of vacancy control because I thought it did create balance while existing tenants were protected. It allowed investors to generate a return. Because of the excessive increases we've seen in the last few years, I've changed my view on that, and I think we do need to think temporarily about some way to suppress these very large increases.
Thank you. The other question I have is this. The federal government also, in the 1990s, they walked away from housing altogether, but just prior to the cancellation of the National Affordable Housing Program in 1993, successive governments, conservative and liberals, also actually started to cut funding to housing programs, to the devolution in terms of the subsidies as well. In order to address the housing crisis, do we need the federal government back at the table, aside from construction dollars, but also actually working in partnership with the provinces in a cost share kind of approach to subsidies to make rent affordable?
Yes, and I think that has happened. I mean, the National Housing Strategy was a massive re-engagement of the federal government in 2017, starting in 2018. But I think the weakness of the National Housing Strategy is that it has been very much a federal housing strategy and has not engaged the provinces in the degree to which it should, and therefore leave additional provincial resources to assist in attacking this problem. Some provinces are independently more active than others, certainly your own in British Columbia. But I think the National Housing Strategy has to be far more collaborative and far more expansive in terms of its collaboration with the provinces on this issue.
Yeah, on the question around subsidies, though, there isn't a current subsidies initiative from the federal government. So this is for the operating side. Do you think that the federal government needs to get back into providing subsidies on the operating side in collaboration with provinces and territories?
Well, you can address the subsidy in two ways: by providing upfront capital grants and reducing the amount of mortgage a project has to carry. That has the same effect of giving them a bigger mortgage and giving them payments to help pay the mortgage, which is the way we used to do things. So it's a wash in terms of that approach. But I think in terms of I think it makes more sense from a policy point of view to separately support supply, and then for households that can't afford that supply to provide them a housing allowance. And within the National Housing Strategy, the Canada Housing Benefit was designed to do exactly that, to provide subsidies to households for whom the rents were too high. I think that program is woefully underfunded and should be significantly expanded if we in fact want to address the needs of the low-income people.
Ms. Kwan, Ms. Gray for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. My first couple of questions are for Mr. Irwin. So you had sent in a brief, and you asked that the committee focus on the issue of rental supply, and that the governments should avoid putting forward restrictions that limit new rental supply. From your vantage point, is there any new or proposed restrictions in the jurisdiction of the CMHC that is presently limiting Canada's ability to build more rental supply?
Well, I think in terms of CMHC, we talked a little earlier. I think Mr. Dixon and through the chair with MP Aitchison about the mortgage rates that have been increased, and that's certainly going to be detrimental to getting the mortgage insurance rates, which will be increasing that now. We are in a crisis, right? And we don't want to be alarmist, but I think we all acknowledge this is a crisis, and so we really do need to keep that at the forefront of all decisions that we make. What can we be doing that will help? And so in times like this, I think you do have to, not do things like increase mortgage insurance, like tighten underwriting on loans. Like we need, and as all the witnesses and Mr. Pomeroy is speaking about as well, it's very important that we are able to unlock funding through CMHC, through RCFI, through MLI Select, through mortgage insurance rates that actually get projects, shovels in the ground, and get rental housing built. Mr. Dixon's talked about all the projects they'd like to be doing. They can do them with the support that will provide more affordable rents with support from various levels of government, including CMHC. So we were I think, a bit perplexed at the recent move to increase mortgage insurance rates by CMHC. This is not the right time to be doing things that make it more difficult to get rental housing projects built.
Thank you very much. And to tag on to that, I do agree for sure that there is a housing crisis. And can you go through maybe what would be the biggest regulatory challenges that you would face in adding to an affordable supply of rental and housing units, and what that breakdown would be, say, with different levels of government? Specifically, say, at the federal level, one example, I've read reports about, the different tiers of step code, how that can add to the cost of housing, although, energy efficiency is really important, but it does add to cost. So what are some of those different regulatory challenges that do add to affecting affordable supply?
I think when you look at the costs that go into building rental projects and how that squares with actually being able to provide affordable, you've had many witnesses here, whether it was on Tuesday or today, talking to you through the chair about these challenges in getting purposeful rental projects built that can also be affordable. It is a big challenge to navigate that, and so whether it is looking at sort of the fundamentals around how long it takes to get projects approved, the different sort of government fees and charges, and we're seeing certainly in Ontario, and I speak about that since that's my primary jurisdiction, Ontario is certainly making policy changes to help make that better by giving discounts and deferrals on government fees and charges, because they recognize that's something they can do to help get projects going. But ultimately, when it comes to affordability, I think what we're really sort of saying is we do require all housing types types all partners at the table. There's a huge need for nonprofits and co-ops. They provide we work with lots of organizations. Habitat for Humanity does great work. We need them at the table doing what they do. We need to be doing what we do. And there's an ability to, through whether it's different government subsidies, different grants or supports, Open Doors in Toronto, for example, to get buildings built with affordable components in them. And inclusionary zoning is it's a topic that gets a lot of attention, and there's an assumption that we oppose that. And the response is we understand what that policy tool is intending to do. Again, as long as we can get the density required to make the project economically viable, then we can make that work.
Great. Thank you. I want to just add in one more quick question here. So based on that, how much regulatory delays and charges would add to the cost of new rental units?
How much? Sorry.
How much would that add to the cost of rental units with regulatory burdens and charges like you were referring to?
I think it's tough to give a blanket response to how much it is. It I think depends on the project and the jurisdiction. But the reality is, government fees and charges are a huge cost of the overall. When you look at the overall cost of a project, government fees and charges, and I would say red tape caused by sort of all the delays and the time it takes. Time is money.
Do you have a percentage estimate, like for example, like a range that might be?
Mr. Dixon may well be able to provide a number.
Mr. Dixon?
So there have been various studies that adding transfer taxes plus development charges plus payroll taxes plus HST self-assessment on the completion of a new rental adds roughly 30% to the cost of a new rental property.
Thank you very much.
That's great. Now we'll go to Mr. Long and see how his sound quality is. Mr. Long, you have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues, and thank you very much to our witnesses for their presentations this morning.
Mr. Long, sorry, translation advises me that they cannot interpret, so we'll now move to Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses for attending this morning. Mr. Pomeroy, can I start with you in terms of the student housing recommendation that you made? You've given some very interesting information to the committee, past and present, as it relates to the impact that students have on the rental housing market. And I know that for all of us around the table who have a university or a college in our municipality, we know that the strains that student housing can put on a neighborhood, and by extension to those people who are looking for an affordable home to purchase or for an affordable place to rent. And so as it relates to government programming, currently I think we do offer, in bits and pieces through the National Housing Strategy, support to colleges and universities for new supply. But what do you suggest in terms of either legislative improvements as part of the strategy or new funding for colleges and universities to assist with that issue?
Thank you for the question, and to you, Chair. Yes, I mean, international students have become a very, very significant factor in demand. We saw over 650,000 international student visas issued last year, and they do displace people in the local rental market. I think while a non-profit organization working in collaboration with the university could potentially utilize current programs of the National Housing Strategy, it's not something that's promoted or encouraged. And given the limited funding, most of them would choose to use their funding for low-income households. But there is a displacement effect. I mean, if it could build 1,000 units of student housing, and that would stop the displacement of 1,000 units in the local low-rent market, it's a very indirect way of impacting on that affordability need. And the more important piece is that student housing, the way it's configured, and there are a number of projects that have been built in Waterloo, in Ottawa, and I think you have one in Hamilton as well, where you've got 4 students sharing a shared unit with private bedrooms and bathroom, and then a shared living area. The rents per square foot on that type of product are very, very high and very, very lucrative. So I think there is an opportunity to actually stimulate and encourage construction of student housing, and it could be done completely through private sector, or it could be done in collaboration with universities if they happen to have land that they could identify for a site to do that. And it would have a hugely impactful effect on displacing this pressure that the students are putting on the local market.
Thanks, Mr. Pomeroy. Mr. Dixon, your friend and colleague was here at our last meeting, Mr. Brooks, and we talked about, my questions to him was how do we utilize the financial clout of REITs to assist in creating supply, but more importantly, affordable supply. And I think you referenced a project here today that's happening in the GTA that accomplishes that. What kind of programs or incentives do we need to provide to ensure that the work that you're doing is creating supply rather than taking it out of the system, I think, as has been the critique and criticism in certain sectors of the country when they look at the impact of REITs on the rental market?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Chair. Supply is the solution to our problem. With our population growing at 1 million people in 2022, we absolutely need to build more homes. And there are programs, as I discussed, that can help with the supply. The challenge with new supply is it takes many, many years to come online. Approval timelines, construction timelines, it is a minimum of 5 years before any project of any size comes online. We have worked, I will say, looking to preserve existing affordability is an idea that can have immediate impact. And when CMHC came out with their MLI Select mortgage insurance product last March, it's, I think, an excellent product by design where there's enhanced terms for affordability, accessibility, and sustainability. However, based on the feedback that I've heard from big lenders and from other borrowers, the vast majority of the MLI Select that's being issued today is for sustainability. It's not for affordability. And I think the issue is that the criteria in that product is set too high. You have to put 40% of your units of an existing building at the affordable level before you get any benefits. And the loan benefits do not equate with the loss of economics. That doesn't mean the project isn't bad. In fact, I think the project is great. We just need to find the right mix between economic incentives and social incentives. I think if we drop that number to 20% or 10%, 10 or 20% of almost every building is a lot better than 40% of no buildings.
Madame Chabot pour 2 minutes et demi.
Madame Chabot, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Pomeroy. On the question of affordable housing, as you know, which is our concern, a major concern, we're trying to see how we can ensure affordable housing. In Quebec, they have a strategy which perhaps has a different definition of affordable housing. One of the witnesses earlier today said 30%. 30% seems to be a threshold or a point in most regions, applies in most provinces. And when we talk about the right to housing or real estate law, based on individual cases, not necessarily a generic 30%, the individual would assume that he doesn't go beyond the 30% of revenue. Now, this 30% figure is not always the same amount, depending. Should we tighten up this 30% rule to have a uniform application, and so we can compare apples to apples?
Question, and through you, Chair, the use of an affordability metric like 30%, it's a relative metric and it depends on people's income, so it varies across income bands. I think, moving to a more explicit affordability criteria, and as the U.S. has used for many years, they define affordability relative to a percentage of median income, and very low income is up to 30% of the median, which is a very low level. There's some analysis from colleagues here in Canada, the HEART initiative, which is actually developing that same kind of metric in Canada. So I think we need to think a bit more carefully about how we define affordability levels when we're asking both nonprofits and developers to include affordable units in their projects. I think currently in the National Housing Strategy, it gets a little bit confusing because they have a number of different streams of funding, which all use different definitions. And for example, the RCFI definition, which uses 30% of household income for all households, is twice as high as the MLI Select criteria that Dan Dixon spoke about, which uses 30% of renter incomes, because renter incomes are half that of owners. So I think we do, if we are concerned about renter affordability, we do need to examine that metric, come up with a more precise and also absolute number, rents below 1,000, rents below 800, some number, as opposed percentages of income, because they do, they mean all things to all people.
Merci, Madame Chabot.
Thank you, Madam Chabot. Ms. Kwan, 2.5 minutes.
Just very quickly to Mr. Dixon, for the project that you just cited that's being built, can you advise the RCFI component for that initiative? Is that under the previous iteration of RCFI?
Thank you for the question. And through you, Mr. Chair, yes, it is through the previous 90% of AMR.
All right, thank you. And for the waiving of the property taxes, that's for all the units, is that correct?
That is for the 100 units covered by the Open Door program from the City of Toronto.
Thank you. Quick question to Mr. Pomeroy. In other jurisdictions, what they've tried to do, and then to your question about also needing to address smaller investors, if you will, that's also contributing to the housing crisis. Other jurisdictions have actually put in a measure, especially on the mortgage side. So outside of primary residence, they actually do an escalating increase for additional property ownership as a means to try and control the smaller investors coming in to buy up properties and so on. Do you think that would be an effective measure here for Canada?
I'm not entirely sure which jurisdictions you're speaking of there. Certainly some jurisdictions like Australia, the UK, they actually use tax mechanisms to encourage small investors to invest by basically allowing them to depreciate their asset against their income, or use depreciation against their income. The challenge here is, of course, if we want to have a rental sector, we need rental investors, and trying to find the right balance between encouraging investment and protecting tenants, I think, is the sort of the soft spot we're trying to get to. Regulation certainly can do that. I can't speak specifically to the examples because I'm unfamiliar with them.
So from your perspective, then the best measure is rent control?
No, I mean, I think the issue with rent control, if it suppresses rents too much, it's very good for tenants. But as I'm sure my industry colleagues would suggest, if we suppress rents too much, they simply won't build. And we saw that through the 1990s, despite the fact that rent regulation was removed. And in Ontario's case, rent regulation was removed in 98 at the behest of the industry, on the promise that if you deregulate, we will build. And 16 years later, they only just started building. So I think there's a lag effect that there's a whole bunch of other things going on in the market. It's rather a blunt instrument. It's desirable to protect tenants, which is why protecting sitting tenants is very important. But the over-regulating can have unintended consequences as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kwan. That will conclude the first panel. We thank the witnesses for appearing this morning, and we'll suspend for a few moments while we do a sound check on the next panel. So thank you to the witness for appearing this morning and providing answers to these important questions. We'll suspend for a couple of moments. Welcome back. Welcome back. The committee will resume its study on financialization of housing. Again, to assist the interpreters, kindly, I want to remind members introduce themselves, and those please speak slowly for the benefit of the interpreters. Again, you have the option of choosing to speak in the official language of your choice, and translation services are available here in the room and appearing virtually by using the translation icon at the bottom of your surface. I would remind those appearing not to take screenshots while the meeting is in session. As well, if there's a breakdown in the translation services, please get my attention. We'll suspend while it is corrected. As well, please direct your questions through I, the chair, and we will begin today pour Comité Logement Rosemont, Jean-Claude
Laporte, community organizer.
Neighborhood Land Trust, Joshua Barndit, and for Executive Director for Skyline Apartment Real Estate Investment Trust, Krish Vadivale. Welcome to the committee. We'll begin with Monsieur Laporte for 5 minutes. Monsieur.
Yes, good morning for the invitation, and I have to apologize initially. As soon as I've concluded with the questions period, I'll have to leave. I'm at a convention myself. I'm the coordinator for the Rosemont Committee. A committee was sitting, and we were able to submit our brief. I hope you've had a chance. Madame Schreller, she's in the eastern part of Rosemont, that I believe she's present online somewhere. And Madame Louise Charbot, thank you very much, because it's through her that we received the invitation. And in closing, I'd also like to thank the clerk services and those who are interpreting, because it's an essential service for me today. So, by way of translation, if you will, there's always a contradiction or conflict between social housing and affordable housing. In French, affordable housing means anything. It's a generic term. And social housing makes it much more clear. It's nonprofit generally, or very modestly priced units. So if I say social lodging, in English, affordable housing, but if I say affordable housing, it'll be a straight-on transposition. So social housing might be more appropriate because it respects the intent of the various categories of housing here. No, financialization of housing, we have to set some particular mileposts. It could mean anything in any case. So I think housing, we all understand that housing is a right. And to this end, Canada is a signatory to the Cultural Convention of Rights. It has to be accessible. It has to be safe. Safe doesn't mean, from a criminal break-in point of view, it means that we won't be evicted as well by a household developer in order that he can beef up his rents or any other reason. So all these definitions is in the socioeconomic United Nations Convention. So that is social housing. If it's not, if it is, it's got to be accessible, safe, and secure. It's a right. It's a right. And it is not a good. And you have to respect it for what it is, a right. Now, but in order to make housing secure and safe, you have to treat it as a product or a good. If the right to housing is a right and not a product, we have to counter or oppose the financialization of housing, whether it's fiscal, whether it's subsidies, grants, whether it's at the building end, the supply, whether it's support after. All of this has to go towards a social housing approach. So this would control or constrain speculators, and it's speculators, generally speaking, which will trigger a crisis in housing or lack of housing, particularly for the people of the low or modest income. The objective of financialization basically is a money-making kind of formula. And this goes counter to the objectives of social housing. The government has every responsibility not to support this doubtful approach and, in fact, complicate the situation. The Canadian strategy on housing should look at the financing of social housing and not spread it across half a dozen or so programs to subsidize the developers who have a profit motive, plain and simple. We have to prioritize investment, government investment in social housing in order to help those of modest revenues. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Laporte.
Vadi Vale. 4 minutes. We're still having issues with the next witness. So, Mr. Vadi Vale.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Krish Vadiville, and I'm the Vice President of Finance for Skyline Apartment REIT, which owns and operates over 22,000 apartment units and employs over 1,000 Canadians from coast to coast. Skyline is also a direct member of the Canadian Federation of Apartment Associations, or CFAA, of which I've been a member of the board since 2019, and in the most recent year served as its chair. I also happen to be the chair and president of Victoria Park Community Homes, one of Ontario's largest privately run nonprofit housing providers, which owns and manages over 3,000 affordable homes across southern Ontario and is currently endeavoring to build an additional 200 plus affordable homes in Hamilton, Ontario. I would like to begin by addressing what, in my opinion, is a fundamental truth to the landscape of rental housing in Canada, in that the rate at which rents are increasing today is largely driven by demand for rental housing outpacing its supply. Before contemplating solutions to this problem, I think one must first understand the causes. On the demand side, you have a growing population driven largely by immigration, dovetailed with stricter rules for mortgage qualification that came into force over the past decade, which make home ownership less attainable to first-time buyers, and so they rent. On the supply side, which is where we operate, you have increasing costs of operation, increasing costs to build. You have growing not in my backyard syndrome or NIMBYism with respect to new developments, especially those of the nonprofit type. And you have increasingly hostile sounding political rhetoric aimed at the largest providers of rental housing. To unpack these points further, with regards to operating costs, the breakdown of how $1 of rent is allocated by cost as presented in the brief submitted to this committee by CFAA is largely consistent with our own financial measurements. Additionally, over the past 3 years, we have seen double-digit percentage increases in insurance costs, increase in the cost of labor, and mortgage rates have almost doubled. In contrast, over those same 3 years, the maximum allowable rent increase for most units in Ontario has totaled just 4.3%. These factors make building new rental housing projects less attractive, which results in less new rental supply. Over time, the lack of supply drives up market rent at all price points. If the goal is to increase supply, one must either incentivize new housing supply or remove or reduce current disincentives, including the risk of negative outcomes like vacancy control, which would surely dry up supply. I'd like to conclude with 4 points. Firstly, to address the concept of financialization, Skyline investors currently receive a 4% yield on their investment. Some of our public market peers pay out less than this. By comparison, for the past few months, the 5-year Government of Canada bond yield has hovered just about 3.5%, which is a near risk-free investment. Said more simply, rental housing providers are not more financialized than any other investment, especially when evaluated on a trade-off of risk for return. Moreover, if we truly were over-earning in economic terms, the rental housing market would already be saturated to a point of economic equilibrium, which we clearly do not see today. My second point, at the end of our last fiscal year, Skyline's in-place average monthly rent across Canada was just $1,276 per unit per month, which on an annualized basis would just be over $15,300. CMHC's definition of affordable housing is rent that costs less than 30% of a household's pre-tax income, which would mean that the average Skyline unit would be considered affordable to households earning a little more than $51,000 per year. According to StatsCan, the average renter household had an income of $54,800 in 2021, which would mean that many of Skyline's units are affordable to many renters today. At Skyline, this is my third point, at Skyline, we value our tenants. We do not conduct rent evictions, and we never have. Conversely, in recent years, Skyline has gone as far as to create a tenant relief program that provides rent relief to tenants in our portfolio that have fallen in hard times. In 2022 alone, our tenant relief program has saved over 200 tenancies. Finally, at 22,000 rental units across Canada, Skyline would qualify as one of Canada's largest landlords. Yet of the 5 million rental units available in Canada today, we only own 0.4%. That's not 4 out of every 100 units, but 4 out of every 1,000. If the end goal is to have a rental housing landscape that is dynamic, that provides Canadians with choice, both in terms of location and amenities, but is also largely affordable, then large operators like Skyline Apartment REIT should be part of that solution, and we want to be. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Valdivale, we'll now go with Mr. Barndit. You have 5 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Great.
Yes, Mr. Barndit.
Thank you so much.
Try, we'll see.
So my name is Joshua Barnt. I am honored to depute here on behalf of the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust. I'm coming to you from the neighborhood of South Parkdale in Toronto. In South Parkdale, 11,000 households are tenants.
Mr. Barndit,
80%.
Mr.
Yes?
Barndit, we cannot provide, interpreters cannot translate due to the sound quality, unfortunately.
I'm using your device.
Yes, I realize we have 2 of our members using our devices that cannot be translated either. My apologies. At this stage, I have to...
Will you be compensating me for my time for being here and preparing for this? I'm here for this activity to depute. I was invited by an MP.
Yes, I realize that, Mr. Byrne, but under the rules of the House of Commons, the committee has to have sound quality at a consistent rate that can provide a proper translation, and the translators.
So my participation is
The
is not
translators
allowed,
have advised
even though I
me.
followed all your instructions.
That's correct. The translators have advised me they cannot translate what you're saying due to the sound quality. Unfortunately,
Can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you, but the translators cannot. Mr. Barnett, I'm going to have to suspend you, and we will move. Unfortunately, I'll have the clerk reconnect with you. I will then move to the first round of questioning, beginning with Mr. Aitchison for 6 minutes.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Chair. That's frustrating, and I'm sorry, Mr. Barnett, that it's not working. I'll start with Krish.
That's correct.
Krish, I wanted you to speak a little bit more about what the federal government can do to help stimulate more supply. We've heard from a number of witnesses now that we require the private sector and the not-for-profit sector to all be in on this business and working together, and all providing more housing. What can the federal government do specifically to help ensure that organizations like yours can build more units and ensure that a certain percentage of those are at affordable or attainable rates for people in greater need?
That's a great question, because I think it aptly covers the main issue at hand. I don't think I have a better answer than the answer that was provided to this panel previously by Tony Irwin, which is to look at the MLI Select program and simply just lower the threshold a bit so that the economics make building what would effectively be mixed use with some affordable components more economically viable to builders.
During our recent study of the National Housing Strategy, the chief economist from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation made this statement. I'd like you to speak about it and expand on it. He said that the reality in Canada is that 95% of the rental market is provided by the private sector. So financialization is something that exists by design in our rental market. In an environment of a growing population and more demand for more rental units, we need more financialization in order to get more supply to meet the needs of a growing population. I wonder if you can add your thoughts on those comments.
I mean, my short answer would be I agree with that 100%. To expand on that as to why I agree that strongly, the REIT space, which is where we operate, really is a platform from which everyday Canadian investors, not necessarily the ultra wealthy, can invest in Canadian real estate to earn a return, and in so doing help support the building of housing across Canada. And I think, as you would see both from Skyline's treatment of tenants and many of our peer group, it's not really the large REIT players that are performing renovictions or in a landlord-tenant board situation trying to evict tenants en masse. We're very much operators that value our tenants and value keeping them in place for the long haul, because we value that steady return that we get from monthly rents that are achievable with our tenant base. I think having more participants of size that have professional property management is to Canada's benefit rather than to its detriment.
There's a few of my colleagues in this place here in Ottawa that seem to they don't like REITs, and they think that they get some kind of outrageously special treatment by the government, and we should do more to tax them. And of course, they're big evil corporations. I'm wondering why a big evil corporation like yours would have a tenant relief program. Why do you have that program?
Well, again, because we value our tenants. It takes a lot of effort to put our tenants in place, and we understand that everyone has moments in time in their lives where times are difficult, and we created this relief program to effectively allow for the ability to keep our tenants in place. And I think a happy tenant environment is good for business.
Mike Brooks from RealPAC was here on Tuesday, and one of the recommendations that he presented to the committee was this concept of creating a code of conduct or best practices sort of code for the industry. Would you support something like that? And could you speak about how something like that might work?
I mean, I would think there would be some critical covenants that one would want to include in there. I think one that at least most large operators would agree to would be that we should not have any renovictions completed, and to what extent other similar styled codes would be incorporated would obviously be yet to be determined. But I would suggest that I would be supportive of such a code of conduct to be rolled out.
Of the mix of private sector and not-for-profit or public sector housing, can you give us a general sense of what you think that mix should be? How much of our housing mix should be provided by the not-for-profit sector?
I happened to view the hearings from, I think it was Tuesday, June 6th, and that had Ray Sullivan on board as well. And I think his target profile of somewhere between 6 to 10% is probably the right mix for community housing.
How much? 15?
6 to 10?
I have 15 seconds left, so I think I'll be moving on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aitchison. Madame Martinez-Ferrara pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to thank Mr. Laporte and the Committee for Housing in Rosemont. I think that several questions were lined up by my colleague, but I'd like to ask you some questions for the document that you've sent to the committee, our committee. You spoke of the gap between data published by CMHC and that which is gathered by the various associations such as yours as to rate rental increases. Can you explain why there might be such a wide gap? Yes, well, thank you very much. The data from CMHC are good, they're reliable, but they are for units which are currently inhabited. Whereas the study from our various housing committees took 60 units that were for rent, such as Kijiji platforms. They are up for rent, they're vacant. And this is where we see the huge gap in the rents rates. The two categories are, the stats are good, but I believe that what we find, what is being asked for in rent is shows and reflects the market itself. Well, thank you, Mr. Laporte. You spoke of various approaches to strategies for this and the UN Convention. But housing is a provincial jurisdiction, so I'd like to hear from you on what concrete measures or practical ways that we could work with provinces in order to ensure that we can protect tenants in the current market, and of course this question of financialization of the market. How could we begin working with the provinces to correct this situation? Well, I'm not a constitutionalist, but it's always a tough problem. It doesn't matter if we're talking health, housing, environment, constitutional issues always raise their ugly head. Generally speaking, yes, it is a provincial jurisdiction. But in the 60s and up to 1973, initiatives for social housing came from the federal government, were initiated by the federal. And I don't see what might have changed between then and now. It takes good faith on both sides, of course, but I believe that the federal government could initiate or propose not specific programs as in the past, but an amount of money dedicated for social housing and then negotiate with the provinces. Would you like to participate? Would you like your share of this money to develop social housing? But it would have to be used to this specific purpose. You can't just throw it into general funding or revenue. No, I understand that. That's for the financing of affordable housing projects, if you will. The federal government has taken a legislative approach to ensure that we are going to exclude foreign buyers to complicate the real estate market. We want to do some fiscal reform, of course, for those organizations that manage building stock and housing stock. But what more can be done to have better cooperation or by provincial participation? Well, excluding foreign purchasers from the Canadian market, I think that's a good idea. It's a good thing. Other possibilities might be considered in order to correct this renoviction situation would be perhaps to impose some sanctions on somebody who buys a multi-unit residential unit property and flips it 6 months, a year down the road. Every time that there is a renovation, well, they'll purchase, and then they exert pressure on the tenants to evict them. And then they resell the building. And if they don't resell the building, well, the rents will go from sometimes twice or 3 times. So we have to increase this anticipated, in quotes, tax so that people are discouraged from, making their profit on the backs of the tenants that can't afford it. I have very little time left. So my question for Chris is the following.
You want to be part of the solution. If probably you don't have time to answer it now, but if you could do that in writing, what are the measures that you, the private sector, could actually do to contribute to the housing supply?
A written answer, Mr. Valdivale.
Very well.
Short answer.
I think contributing more rental housing units would be the first step, and that entail would then create different avenues of different price points that would trickle down from supply, at least edging closer to demand.
Thank you. Madame Chabot, pour 6 minutes.
26?
26, did you say? No, 6. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. And thank you to the witnesses. We had quite a nice series of questions, and thank you very much for accepting the invitation, Mr. Laporte, particularly at the last minute. My questions will be addressed to Mr. Laporte. We've received and we've read your brief that you sent to the committee last week when we were discussing financialization. In his presentation, one witness representing the Canadian Federation of Associations of Real Estate Proprietors or Owners said that this was a tiny fraction of tenants who would be evicted on the eviction basis. I could see our witness reacted to that question, but according to you, what's the situation of rent evictions in your particular area of Rosemont? I forgot that was on mute. Thank you. Well, in our brief, we took a look at the statistics on renovations over the last 2 or 3 years, but it's not the total reality. We're not aware of all the evictions or renovictions. The association that you spoke of, I'm sure they're quite correct. It's not the majority of tenants who are victims of renovation. Otherwise, you'd be in a real crisis mode. But even if it is only a small percentage, in 2021-22, 19 buildings with 168 units, they had to move. The rents were increased significantly, and they had to leave, and they were relocated or managed to relocate at great distances from services that they needed, such as childcare, for example. This is a human drama. We're talking about human rights here. Housing is a right, a human right, and we can't talk to it about the assets of a corporation who has to trade on the public markets. It's not the same. One is the merchandisation, the commercialization of housing, and that runs contrary to this basic human right to housing. Well, according to your analysis, that makes sense. But who are the initiators of renoviction? The larger real estate developers or the smaller ones? Well, they're commercial enterprises. They're either investment funds or trusts, particularly REIT style. And those are the owners, the speculators, the re-eviction specialists, if you will, but the neologism in French. But anyway, well, following the phenomenon of renoviction, this did have an impact on the cost of housing for the tenants. Well, yes, I'll give you a specific example. People outside of Montreal, it may not mean much. But on Saint-Gestic, in the heart of my area, Rosemont, we've had a re-eviction. And we stepped up to defend their rights, and everyone seemed to agree to, to fight so that they could keep their housing, their unit. But the landlords had various tricks in their bag, and 3 out of 22 managed to stay in their units, but the others did not. And you can see that there's money to be made there. The owner was saying, well, we'll pay for your move, we'll pay your first 3 months, and we're prepared to give $1,500 for them to get out, to leave. Now, they felt severely harassed, so most of them decided to accept the $1,500 or whatever. The negotiations might have been different in some cases. 3 tenants still remain there. And they said the rents went up from $700 for a 4-room unit to $1,500. Now, for people in Toronto or Vancouver, that probably seems to be peanuts, but the market is quite different in Quebec and in Montreal, and it's a good thing for tenants that we don't have to pay rents as are asked for in many other Canadian municipalities. Nonetheless, whatever the reason, I mean, it's just inhumane to deal with tenants that way. Well, I believe that your example, well, do I have any time left at all, Mr. Chairman? No, well, I've just been cut off there, Mr. Laporte. So thank you.
Madame Kwan for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for their presentation. Just to sort of pick up on where Mr. Laporte was saying, while in, I think in Quebec, the situation there that he had highlighted is important to note. But what's also interesting is that what's happening in Quebec is also happening elsewhere. So in a previous presentation from Dr. Nimoy Lewis from the School of Urban and Regional Planning, Toronto Metropolitan University, he testified to say that a financialized landlord is a purchasing company that's privately held, an asset manager or publicly traded company, i.e. a real estate investment trust, which acquires rental properties at scale and applies financial logic, metrics, and priorities to generate returns to shareholders and investors. In his study, he actually looked at over a 27-year period in Toronto, and he found that these sort of financialized landlords engage in 40% of the transactions, and in terms of turning over properties. Real estate investment trusts accounted for 7%, a smaller percentage, which is noted. However, he went on to say, REITs do apply the same acquisition and management practices which we know undermine Canada's duty to fulfill the housing rights for all Canadians. What's interesting to note in his particular study is that he focused on where the acquisitions were made, and then he also did a comparative analysis in the demographics and found that it was concentrated in targeting the Black population. And in his study, he found that financialized landlord account for actually 72.86% of all those units that have been transacted in those particular geographies. And the most important point here now coming to it is this. In terms of displacement problems, financialized landlords, we examined evictions in the City of Toronto over the last 4 years, between 2018 and 2021, where there was approximately just under 63,000 evictions in the City of Toronto, and financialized landlord account for 42% of those evictions. And then in terms of evictions for non-payment of rent, financialized landlords file just under 80% of those evictions for non-payment of rent. Anyway, he goes on to provide further data. And it seems to me that this is not really matching up from some witnesses who say, hey, I'm a REIT and we don't do any evictions. And financialized landlords, some might say, is that they're not engaging in these practices, but yet the data from independent studies show otherwise. So I guess my question to Mr. Laporte is this. In the City of Quebec, you mentioned that some of the challenges that you face, and you are seeing evictions that are taking place. The bottom line is this: should housing be treated as a commodity? Or should housing be treated as a basic human right, a place for people to acquire as a home, a place that they can actually feel safe and be able to afford?
Merci. Oui, c'est intéressant.
Yes, thank you very much. That study is quite interesting. And I'd like to answer, well, the answer to your question is your question. It's rather a rhetorical question. It's not a commodity. Because if it becomes a commodity, it extinguishes the human right. Housing is absolutely essential so that someone can live properly, have the family, etc. If not, the rest is lost. Whether it's physical health, mental health, difficulty in having access for your family, medical, childcare. Housing is a fundamental basic right. Where you live on the planet, I mean, I understand the investor who is investing in other to make money, but not on the backs of individuals like that.
The housing advocate actually made a very clear point. about how housing should be treated as a basic human right, and I thank you for that answer. I don't think it was a rhetorical question from this perspective, because there is a bit of a debate here. Some people believe that housing should be used as an investment tool, and so I need to hear from witnesses in terms of where they stand with respect to that. Now, on the question around the private sector.
If you'll allow me an intervention, please. I didn't want to take it in a rhetorical fashion, but to me it was self-evident. This is why I used those words. I didn't want to offend you.
No offense taken, and because I think you see housing from a human perspective, and I think that's why perhaps you thought my question is rhetorical, because some people don't necessarily see that. They see it as an investment tool, and so thank you for that. But I wanted to ask a next question. With respect to the private sector, because some people will say that the NDP, for example, or those who want to address housing as a basic human right somehow don't support the private sector, which of course is not true. In the situation with where we are at the moment, with the housing crisis that we're at, some witnesses have called for, such as ACORN, to say that there should be a moratorium on the acquisition of these older apartments that come into the market that end up being turned. And so my quick question, I see a signal from the chair, like my neck is going to get cut off kind of signal. Can I just quickly ask to say that given the current crisis that we're faced with, should we be stopping the acquisition of the housing that comes onto the market for it to be turned over for financialized purposes, at least until we can get a handle on the crisis, and let the private market do new construction?
Thank you, Ms. Kwan. That answer will have to come later or in written form. We're well over, and we're okay. Could you provide a yes or no to Ms. Kwan's question? Mr.
Oui, en autant que je sache comment.
Yes, but I will have to formulate the answer. But if I can answer the question directly.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here. I've got a couple of questions for Mr. Vadavel. So first of all, we heard earlier testimony today that red tape and government costs on housing was approximately 30% of the cost. Would you agree with that percentage? Is that what you're seeing as well?
I don't have the exact number, but that would ring true to me. It would be in that ballpark, yes.
Okay, thank you. So how will the increase in interest rates where they are right now affect the affordability of housing and the supply of housing?
The increase in interest rates most likely will stall the development of new housing because, again, there's as a cost that's baked into the pro formas that are used to calculate whether or not we want to build this, it makes it more expensive. And then from an investment perspective, you have, not to delve into financial theory here, but effectively if your risk-free rate is up, the expected rate of return on any investment across the board is higher. So it really makes investors reevaluate the risk-return profile of building new housing.
Great, thank you. In the written submission that you had sent to the committee, you had mentioned that $400,000 a unit build has risen in cost to $500,000. And what would you say would be the largest causes of that increase? Is it government fees? Is it inflated costs of materials? Is it skilled labor shortage? What would be sort of the analysis?
It is all of those things. It is increased cost of labor. It is increased cost of materials. It is development charges, and of course the ever-growing cost of capital.
Great, thank you very much. One of the other things that was in your submission as well was on your efforts to build an additional 200 affordable homes in Hamilton, while also mentioning that there's a rise of NIMBYism. limiting construction on affordable homes. Can you go into greater detail the kinds of tactics that you see used to stall construction of new homes and how those issues might affect the supply of housing?
I can't say specifically with that project, but in general, I think tactics that are used are to either try to suggest that a building is too high or that the surface area coverage is too much, and an attempt to effectively reduce the amount of affordable homes that can be in there. Another one would be to push for underground parking as opposed to above ground, which effectively will reflect on the feasibility of the building, forcing from pure economics perspective, you to have a higher mix of market affordable rent.
And what would you say would be the biggest regulatory challenges that you face in adding to affordable supply of rental and housing units?
Funding.
Access to funding?
Yes.
Okay. There was a report by the C.D. Howe Institute last month that identified municipal and provincial regulation as a significant burden of regulatory costs on new builds. Do you have any comments on that?
I would say that's likely true, especially if you contemplate time as a cost.
Time in the
terms
time
of
it
delays.
takes for delays and time of construction. Would that also, and so adding to that cost, then presumably then you're financing it during that time as well. So then the length of time, the costs just keep going up because you're not able to
Precisely.
To continue. Got a few more seconds here. Okay, great. One of the other things is, can you maybe go into a little bit more detail, some actionable items that the federal government can take in whether it's different regulatory forms or through the CMHC to assist in the affordability of housing?
Sure. I think, like I mentioned earlier, the access to more funding through CMHC and either in reducing the threshold for MLI, through MLI Select or any development of any new tools in the toolbox for what can be used to incentivize new housing development would be great. I think from the affordability perspective, a fund to target acquiring old stock buildings and moving them from the for-profit to non-profit realm would also help shore up the community housing element in the overall mix of housing supply. And I think in part to combat NIMBYism through making
Thank you,
available...
Mr. Valdale.
Okay.
Sorry. We'll conclude with Mr. Collins for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And my question would be following along the same themes of the questions of Ms. Gray, would be to Mr. Vaudeville. Sir, we had previous testimony from CMHC that talked about REIT's involvement with the National Housing Strategy, and I think the testimony provided by CMHC was that...
Point of order.
My apologies, Mr. Collins, but we're at time at the end of the committee, and we do have parliamentary duties shortly. So, as much as we'd like to hear some more, perhaps Mr. Collins can write to the witnesses and get some written testimony. We are at time.
Okay. I sense we did start late, so that's why I was prepared to extend to 5. But if I do not have consensus to move beyond for the set time, no consensus? Okay, I don't have consensus. So with that, the committee must adjourn. Committee is adjourned.